Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the fifth unit in the research methods module of the e-learning MSc program in renewable energy technologies. In the first unit, I made the point that a research report or a thesis is the outcome of a research project or a thesis research activity. Once you've done that thesis or research report, you then often want to communicate the more interesting findings to a targeted audience, or you want to give the findings generally a much wider readership. I mean, not that many people will take your thesis and read it, but a lot more people would read the journal articles, and if it's a conference, people who come to the conference sessions would at least hear you present the research findings. So the thesis really is often a forerunner to the conference paper or journal article. Very often you'd be doing the thesis or the research, you may not even have finished writing the thesis itself or the research report, but then some very interesting findings come up and you might want to package those and submit those, to a conference whilst the thesis is still going on or the research project is still going on. And same for journal articles. You might want to write a journal article even after your literature review. Even after your literature review, if you think you found something interesting in the literature, let's say some disparity between findings of different authors, excuse me, or if you found some novel idea flowing out of the work of earlier researchers, you might want to do a conference paper or a journal article and submit this already, even as your research project is taking shape and getting through to implementation. The outline of this presentation excuse me, the outline of this presentation would be first then to look at the thesis and research reports. What are the contents, what goes into that, then to go on and look at journal articles and conference papers, and then I would home in particularly on abstracts, summaries and referencing, because these are critical areas of both thesis and research reports, but also journal articles and conference papers. And then, as we've done in most of the units, there would be an assignment which I would expect you to submit at some very specific date. So, the thesis and the research reports. Well, a thesis is a document, as I've said, submitted in support of candidature for an academic degree or a professional qualification. Now, this is usually the presentation of the author's research and the findings. Okay, so you want to describe the full research, the methodology you use. You would have specified some things in your thesis synopsis, but as you went through the research, some of this would have changed, or you would have had to change some aspect because of new findings that came up during the research. So at the end of the research, you want to now document what you actually did by way of methodology, and then the findings. Okay, what came out of the research finding of the research, and how does that contribute to knowledge? Now, the thesis is a demonstration of the student's ability to explore, develop, and organize materials relating to a certain topic or problem in the field of study. And the main aim of the thesis or project is not only to pursue research and investigation, but also to write an extended scholarly statement, clearly, effectively, directly addressing the research problem. So, you need to think through your thesis. You need to make sure that it communicates clearly some scholarly contribution, and particularly at the doctoral level. At the master's level, we are not too demanding of original contributions, but at the doctoral level, we expect to see some original contribution. Either way, it must be clearly stated, and it must effectively communicate what you have found out in the course of researching the particular problem or research question. Now, the structure of a thesis, again, would be dictated by the university where you are making the submission. Some universities have quite rigorous guidelines for writing of thesis. Number of pages, the way in which the cover pages should be presented, the order of the upfront material, like the acknowledgements and the abstract and the dedication, all of those things. Some universities have very clear guidelines on this, but you would have a title page. Not normally, you would of necessity have a title page, and this is made up of the full title of the thesis, the name and previous qualification of the author, and the department to which the thesis is being submitted, in partial fulfillment of requirement for that degree, for what degree, whether it's a master's degree or a doctoral degree, what kind of master's degree, and in which faculty, and month of year, the thesis is being presented. All of these need to be spelled out quite clearly. Now, one major section, as I've said, is the abstract. Now, the abstract is a brief summary of the thesis and the most likely part of the thesis to be widely published and read. There are compendiums of abstracts, there are abstract indices, so the abstract will be read by a wide range of people, or it will be very widely diffused. Okay, and many people, when they read the abstract and they think this thesis contains something interesting, would then look for the thesis, get a copy, and then read the thesis. But most often it's the abstract that would go much further and be read by a lot more people. So the abstract should have a concise description of the problem addressed, the methodology used, very brief statement on the methodology used, the results, as well as the conclusions. People want to know what you found out, and it is that which is going to excite them to want to go into the thesis and read the thesis. The abstract should usually be composed as a single paragraph, not exceeding 500 words. About a page is what is recommended in most cases, maybe a page and a half again, but no more than that. Again, the longer the abstract, the less likely it is that people will read it to the end. So unless there are very hard and fast rules about a minimum number of words or minimum number of pages, you want to keep your abstract to about, for a thesis, to about a page, okay, so that people will read it. For a paper, we will get into that. You're talking, a few words. You're talking maybe half a page or a third of a page. But for a thesis, you want to keep it to about a page. You would have a table of contents. You would have a list of figures, a list of tables and acronyms and abbreviations, and then there will be what I call the upfront material, the prefatory material. This is materials like the preface, foreword, acknowledgement, etc. Anything else that you want to put in there. And the acknowledgement page, in our case, is mandatory. That you necessarily owe some people for their support, at the very least your supervisors, but also people in the lab, people in the field that you surveyed, and you want to say some thank you to them. Then you go into the body of the thesis itself, and there would usually be an introduction. Now the introduction provides the background to the thesis. You can change the title, you don't have to call it introduction, but there would be some chapter that gives the background and the rationale for the research work. It would also provide information that is related to the need for the research, and in the process it should build the argument for the research and the research questions and aims. Usually in this introductory chapter you would state the aims and the objective of the research. Usually, you don't have to, but usually that's where you would do that. And then sometimes also you would give a detailed description of the various chapters, as well as their content. I mean, some description of chapter 2, what is in there, chapter 3, what's there, chapter 4, and so on. So that's the introductory chapter. And you can break this into more than one chapter. It doesn't need to be one chapter. You could have one that just provides the background, and you could have another one that goes into a lot more the justification of the objectives, the justification of the thesis itself. If there's some solid elements or solid arguments to be presented there, you could well put that into one separate chapter. So there's usually no binding rule about the chapter itself, but you would need a chapter with all chapters giving that introduction. Then there will be a literature review. Now this literature review again needs not be a chapter on its own titled literature review. It could be titled differently. If it's on solar thermal power systems, you could, and some particular type of solar thermal power systems, you could just title it recent developments in solar thermal power technology, and it would include a literature review of what people have done, what new developments have come. All of that will be captured under a chapter like that. Not necessarily called literature review, but you need to show that literature review in some second or third or so chapter of the thesis. And the review should provide a detailed account of the research works done by other researchers in the selected area of study, highlighting the merits as well as the limitations. And referencing in this particularly important in this section because it contains mostly works from other researchers. You don't want to present the literature review as your work. It must be clear who has done which work, when it was published, where it was published, and so on. Now, this is where plagiarism becomes an issue, and it is also important to discuss theory which is directly relevant to your research in this section. Now, again, it doesn't have to be one chapter. It could be two chapters. You could do the literature review in one chapter, and you could do the theoretical framework in another chapter. It depends on the size of the thesis, and it depends on the extent to which the research is based on theory or based on experiment and so on. That will determine how you structure this chapter. But I will repeat that plagiarism is a major issue at this point, at the point of the literature review and the theoretical framework. You don't want to take other people's work and present them as your own. These days there are many ways of checking, including the use of software to detect the use of other people's material or phrases that are similar to other papers or theses that have been published. So one needs to respect this, and from even an ethical point of view, avoid plagiarism in one's thesis. Methodology. There would usually be a chapter on methodology. If it's an experimental project, you would have an experimental layout or experimental design where you would describe the setup of the experiment, you would describe the procedures, the instrumentation that was used. So all of that can go into one chapter. If it's a more social science type, then you would discuss the type of survey methodology you used, the type of analysis that was intended. Okay, all of that must be laid out very clearly, how you chose your sample. All of that must be laid out in the methodology section. So this section really presents an understanding of the philosophical framework within which the research will be carried out, and gives the methodological approach as well as the justification of the chosen methodology. I mean, you don't just choose any methodology for any research project. I mean, under normal circumstances, there would be a number of alternative ways in which one could go about investigating a particular problem. So you want to give justification for the approach that you choose, because usually either that would be most suited to the topic or that would be more suited to your budget. I mean, if you have budgetary constraints, then you can't do a census, even though a census of the whole country might be the best way of answering the question of whether Ghanaians use the latest mobile phone technology or not. You want to do a census to have a firm answer, but you can't do a census because you don't have the funding for it. So you would do a survey, and even that survey might have to be restricted. Normally you should have a random sampling technique, but you might choose to do more purposive sampling, because random sampling might take you to some part of the country or the district that your budget may not allow you to go to. So you want to justify the methodology that you've chosen, or a computer simulation. Again, maybe for budgetary reasons you might decide not to do an experiment, but rather to do a simulation. Okay, because it's a lot cheaper usually to write a computer program and run it on your own laptop or the university's network. So you want to justify the method that you've chosen. The section should also clearly define the boundaries of the research in terms of the methodological approach, and describe steps taken to ensure ethical research practice. We've already mentioned plagiarism. You want to make sure that you are not just in the process of your research just taking other people's work and passing them off as your own. One, you are very likely to be caught. Two, it's bad practice. And three, you can ruin a whole career just by a silly thing like that. So once you've described your methodology, before that you've indicated clearly your objectives, you now want to go into your results and a discussion of those results. Okay, so a section that basically contains the research findings, and describes the observations made during the research as well as the interpretations that you've given to these observations. Now, the results could be presented in tabular form, as figures, or both. But you don't want to present the same data in the table and then also do it in a figure. I mean, if it's a lot of detailed numbers, you might want to put it in an appendix and show the figure in the body of the thesis. But you don't. It's not good practice to have the table and then exactly the same numbers showed in a graph. You have to make up your mind and decide what best presents the results that you are seeking to communicate. Now, where possible, tables, figures, or both, where possible, and clear explanation should be given, to them. It's not good enough to just put in a table, and then just move on. You have to describe what's in the table and say a few words about what is there, what is the importance of the numbers that are presented in the table. It is also important to note that information presented in tables should not be repeated in figures and vice versa. That's what I just said. Then you would go to conclusions and recommendations chapter. Now this section draws all the important arguments and findings together, and in the process provides the reader with a strong sense that the work has been done satisfactorily and that it was worthwhile. So in your conclusions, you want to capture what was done, and then you want to try and relate this back to where you started, the literature review, and show how this responds to some questions that were posed in the literature and unanswered at the time of your research, or some challenges that are prevailing in the society for which your findings would help to address these challenges. So it's important that you end the thesis on a solid note to convince the reader that you've done some useful work. It is also important to end this section on a strong note by suggesting directions for future research in the respective field. Okay. Nobody answers all the questions in the research project. Nobody says the last word. If you've done a good job, you would realize there's some other areas that would need to be investigated to add value to your own work, to your own findings. So it's important that you spell this out in your concluding chapter, so others can pick this up and indeed push forward the frontiers of knowledge in your chosen area. Then references that would come after your conclusions and recommendations. Now this comprises a list of the major works, publications and authorities consulted in the course of writing the thesis. Now we will say a little bit more about this in the referencing section when we come towards the end of this unit. Appendices. Appendices are a tricky area for many students. It's not clear to them what should go in the body of the thesis and what should go into the appendix. Now what I usually tell students is that the appendix should contain things that are too detailed for the regular reader. The regular reader does not want to go into a boring set of calculations, for instance. Okay, step-by-step calculations. But it might be important for the thesis, in which case you put that in the appendix and you summarize it in the chapter, looking at the conceptual and theoretical framework, for the thesis. Also, let's say engineering drawings. Assuming you've done a manufacturing type project where you've developed a new product and you've had to do engineering drawings, to enable the manufacturing of the product. The engineering drawings, because they are detailed, you don't need to present those in the body of the thesis itself, but you could include this in an appendix. Sometimes people have even done this on CD-ROMs, where they've scanned the drawings or done it in AutoCAD or Pro Engineer or some other type of CAD/CAM type design software, and then they would put it on a CD-ROM and attach the CD-ROM as an appendix, to the thesis. So please bear that in mind. The appendix is those detailed pieces of information that the regular reader would not generally be inclined to read. And you don't want to lose a reader in the thesis. You don't want to put something in the thesis that will turn a reader off. So anything that is really, really detailed, you put that in the appendix so the thesis itself can flow quite smoothly. So what do we say in the slide? The appendix provides a place for important information which, if placed in the main text, would distract the reader from the flow of the argument. Okay, so it includes raw data, That's a good one, because sometimes you might want to show, if you've done like a survey, you want to show your actual, the actual answers from the survey, the number of people who said yes, the number of people who said no. If it's an experiment, you want to show your actual measurements. Okay, if it's a data logger you've used, you want to include the output sheet, or at least a sample output sheet of the data logger. Okay, so detailed raw data type, sometimes you might want to reorganize the data to make it more compact and put this, in the appendix. And the appendices they are either numbered or they are lettered: Appendix A, Appendix B, Appendix C, or Appendix I, Appendix 1, 2, 3. But you often want to distinguish the numbering from the body of the thesis, so that you avoid confusion. Okay. Now, I think I've said this over and over again, that the research report is very much the broader product, of which a thesis is a subset. Okay. Research reports include thesis, but also they include scientific reports in research institutes. They include reports in companies where staff have been delegated or instructed to do some particular research on an aspect of the company. So the research report is a much broader product than the thesis, which is very specific to university research projects. And the sections really are very much the same. The title, abstract, introduction, materials and methods. The titles would vary depending on the actual research. Results and discussion, conclusions and recommendations, and references, and of course appendices that are not shown here, but you would need to have appendices. I said earlier that once you've done the research report or the thesis, then you want to extract journal articles or conference papers out of this. But it doesn't always have to happen that way. I mean, quite often you would do conference papers as you carry out your research, and interesting things come out, interesting findings are made. You want to package these and present them at a conference, or indeed, package them and submit it to a journal for publication. Because if you apply yourself, really well in the thesis, you could come up with a couple of major findings as you go along, and then you don't need to write the whole thesis before you publish it. Somebody else might actually do it before you. So when the good idea comes up, publishable idea, you can do it even when you have not completed your thesis. But usually that's what would happen. You would complete the thesis, and then you would do a journal article or a conference paper. So a journal article is a means by which a scholar puts forth the results of an academic research or information to add to the body of knowledge in their field of study. And this is usually published in journals. Okay? It is sometimes referred to as a scientific article, or a peer-reviewed article, or just a scholarly research article. There are many names for that. But that's the way in which you communicate to a broader academic audience. Okay. A conference paper, on the other hand, is similar to a journal article, except that this one is delivered at a conference. And usually the conference paper is less rigorously reviewed. In fact, some conference papers are not even reviewed at all. So you would present it. The review process is in the question and answer during the conference presentation, and then you learn from that, and you might then in your future journal article address the limitations or the weaknesses as were pointed out during the presentation at the conference. So the conference paper is very much like a journal article, except that it is clearly presented at conferences, and secondly, it is usually not as rigorously reviewed as the journal article is. Now, the structure of journal articles and conference papers, again, you'd have a title. The title you never miss. I mean, I again advise students that I find titles exciting, and usually when I'm writing anything, I want to start off with the title, because if I have an exciting title, it really carries through in the write-up of the paper, of the thesis, or of the report. But I know people who write the report before they try to figure out what the title should be. Well, I admire them, but I never do that, because I want to know where I'm going. I want to know what I'm trying to communicate, and then that helps me to to structure the report and to to pick my words carefully and appropriately. So that's the same advice I give to people. Please spend some time at the beginning of your research or your thesis writing to get a precise topic that you yourself think is exciting, that you yourself find interesting, and then usually this will carry to the rest of the work. You want to indicate the authors. The thesis might be your thesis, but the journal article or conference paper might be a joint publication between you and your supervisor. But the supervisor usually will be prompting you and guiding you in the right direction. He may not go to the lab with you, he may not actually code the computer software with you or go into the field to do the survey, but he would have asked those questions, he would have pointed out those potential errors, flagged things that you should pay attention to, and usually what you do is that your thesis, the publications coming out of your thesis are quite often joint publications with your supervisor. So you would list the authors and their institutional affiliation. It should be ordered according to the level of contribution to the paper. If it's a thesis, then usually you would be first, and the supervisor might be a second author. But if it's a broader research report, then you want to see who made a contribution to the report, those who actually did the work versus those who helped in the review and the shaping of it, and they might likely come towards the end, whilst those who actually did the work would come forward. Abstract. It is important to provide an abstract of about 350 words, which should summarize the entire paper, highlighting the most important information, such as the purpose of the research, the methodology used, the result and conclusion. Okay. Every abstract must have something about what the whole thing was about, why it was done, what was the purpose of the research. Then you must say something about how it was done. Even if it's one sentence, you have to say something about how it was done. Because as I said earlier, in the first module, the first unit, you can't really say a whole lot in an abstract or an executive summary on the methodology. But you should say something, one line at least, on what method you used, how the work was done. And then, of course, what people are more interested in also is the results and the conclusions from the work. And all of this must be reflected in the abstract. Then you would have an introduction similar to the thesis or a research report. The methodology section also similar. Results and discussion, nothing really different. Then conclusions and recommendations, and then the reference section. So the journal article or the conference paper is a lot smaller than the thesis. A thesis would typically be around 100 pages, plus or minus 20, if you like. 80-page thesis are about the smallest that you tend to see around. And then 120, 150-page thesis, those are the really large thesis. Occasionally you get even longer thesis at the master's level. At doctoral level, it's not uncommon to see a 300-400 page thesis, because this is the work of 3-4 years. So 100 pages a year. that's not surprising, to even put it that way. So yes, the journal article would be 10 pages, maybe 20 pages. Okay, so it is a fraction, small fraction of the size of the thesis itself. So even though the sections are the same as the chapters in your thesis, one has to be more selective, and one has to home in more on the interesting aspects, the interesting findings, the interesting conclusions. Not all the conclusions, not all the results that were found, but the most interesting ones are the ones that you capture in the paper. And a thesis could yield 2 or 3 journal articles. So these would handle different aspects of the thesis or different aspects of the result. So one has to be quite selective in the choice of words, the choice of material, and respect the size of the journal article. That's a major constraint when one is doing a journal article or a conference paper. I said I would say a bit about abstracts and summaries in general, but also referencing, because these tend to be the Achilles heel of many research paper or a research report, thesis or journal article or conference paper. Now, in the case of the abstract, we said an abstract is a brief summary of a research article, thesis, review, conference proceeding, or any in-depth analysis of a particular subject, and is mostly used to help the reader quickly grasp the purpose of the paper, okay, or the thesis. Okay. So an abstract always appears at the beginning of the manuscript, acting as the first port of call for any given academic paper, and it usually contains between 300 and about 500 words. Okay, so I say not more than a page for a thesis. If it's a journal article or conference paper, 300 words, about a third or half a page, maximum. Now, summaries, are also an abbreviated, a summary is an abbreviated version of the most significant points in a book, article, report, or a meeting. It is usually about 5% to 15% of the length of the original. Okay, so if it's a research report and you're doing a summary, I said a 100-page research report will yield something of the order of about 10, maybe between 5 to 10 pages, occasionally up to 15 pages, but it's a summary, so you don't want to make it a big document. Otherwise, as I said earlier, very few people are going to read it. Okay. So 10% plus or minus a few percentage points would be the rule of thumb to use for the size of a summary. Abstracts are much shorter. Abstracts 1 page, 1.5 pages maximum. Often, even for a journal paper, half a page or a third of a page. Okay, but summaries can be longer. The rule of thumb are 10%. It is useful because it condenses the material, informing the reader of the author's most important points. The commonest summary, the commonest of summaries is the executive summary, which is mostly for business and management purposes. It varies from an abstract in that an abstract is usually shorter, providing a neutral overview or orientation rather than being a condensed version of the full document. Okay, so an abstract is not a condensed version. An abstract is, highlighting the important aspects of the thesis or the research paper, whereas the summary really is a condensed version of the full document. Abstracts are extensively used in academic research, where the concept of the executive summary would be meaningless. Okay, in research, executive summary is usually for reports for business people, for policy makers. Okay, but abstract is what the scientists look for. They want something objectively written. They want something that says what has been added to knowledge, so that they can go and check it out if it's something they can use for their own research. Then referencing. Referencing is the other difficult area, particularly for students. In a journal, you would have very clear guidelines. In the back of most journals, you'll find the guidelines for papers in the journal. But as I say, it is really the Achilles heel, because often students they make a lot of mistakes with journal or with thesis reference sections. The references are all over the place, different formats. Essential parts of references are often missing. So it's important that one pays attention to what goes into a reference and make sure that these are reflected in your thesis. Now, a reference is defined. Then people define this in different ways. But basically, the Montfort University gives one definition, where a reference is the detailed bibliographic description of the items from which information is gained. Okay, so all the bibliographic material. This would be other theses, conference papers, journal articles, research reports, even the mass media, newspapers sometimes. But the more academic, a product or a paper, the less you want to rely on non-peer reviewed material like newspaper articles and so on. Because we know in many countries newspapers or some newspapers at least, are not rigorously edited, and lots of errors often appear, both in terms of the content as well as the grammar and things like that. So you want to rely less and less on non-peer reviewed mass media in academic writing. Now, references should enable the reader to locate the sources used for a research work. It should help support arguments and add credibility to research work. It should show the scope and breadth of a research work, and it should acknowledge the source of an argument or idea by acknowledging the various authors so as to avoid plagiarism. It's come up again that if you take other people's work and you present it as your own without referencing their work, you're stealing their work. I mean, this is theft. and the punishment can be severe. So you want to avoid plagiarism. Now, references can be presented in two ways: in text, where it is briefly cited within the text, or in the reference list, where it is given in full at the end of the work. Now, there are several referencing formats. Therefore, the in-text name style. This involves citing the name or names of the author or authors or organization in the text with the year of publication. Okay, so Akola Chair 2005, or Ministry of Energy 2010. Okay, so the name of the author or organization and the year of publication. Now, all the sources are then listed in alphabetical order at the end of the work under any of these headings: references, reference list, work cited or works consulted, or bibliography, depending on the style used. Now, bibliography tends to be very open. At least that's what I have done on occasion, where the references are not, where the list does not include all the material that has been explicitly referenced in the work. I have tended to put that under bibliography, and I think many people tend to do that under bibliography, which contains all the bibliographic material that the author has found to be useful to the research done. But the references list really would contain things that have been cited in the document, very, very explicitly. Now, examples of reference, these in-text name style reference formats are the Harvard style, where you have the author and date, the American Psychological Society APA style, the Modern Language Association of America MLA Chicago style. These are all in-text name style type referencing formats. Then you also have the numeric referencing system. In the numeric referencing system, this comprises mainly the two referencing styles: the consecutive numbering style and the recurrent numbering style. Okay. Here, what you're doing is that the consecutive numbering uses superscript numbers in the text that connect with references in their footnotes or chapter endnotes, but usually the former, usually footnotes. Okay. This system uses different and consecutive number for each reference in the text. A list of sources is included at the end of the document, which lists all the works referred to in the notes, references, or works cited. But you would have numbers in the text itself, and these numbers, as I say, there would be a different and a consecutive number for each reference used, and then you would list all of these at the end of the document. Recurrent numbering style uses bracketed or superscript numbers in the text that connect with a list of references at the end of the chapter or the assignment. In this case, the same number can recur if a source is mentioned more than once. So you would say maybe 1, and you would use it in chapter 1, but also in chapter 2, when you refer to the same reference, you would repeat the number 1 because the number is linked to the reference. In the consecutive numbering style, even if you refer to the same Brown and Jones, 1995, several times in the chapter or in the thesis, each time it would come with a different number in line with where it is consecutive position in the reference list. So, but they are both numeric referencing systems, except that one is a consecutive numbering system and the other is a recurrent numbering. So the same number can appear several times in the course of the write-up. Now, the author date style. Here, this style, when used in the text, cites the last family name or surname of the authors or organizational name and the year of publication in the text of the document being worked on. Okay? A full list of all references in alphabetical order must be given at the end of the text. It is important to ensure that the name used in the in-text citation connects with the same name used to start the full reference entry at the end of the text. I mean, if it's again, example of Brown and Jones, then you want to make sure that in the reference list also you have Brown, AJ, and Joe and IB Jones. But the first names must correspond, so that the two references, so the reference and the reference list, the actual citation and the reference list, are very clearly linked. Now, there are also referencing software packages which are now used, becoming more and more common. They're not so common around here, but they should, because they make life a lot easier. Okay, and a referencing software, which is also referred to as a bibliographic management software, is designed to help you store the references which you have located, and then cite those references in an essay, paper, thesis, or book which you are writing. Okay, so it's a very efficient way of managing your references, because then you can call them into anything you're writing, not just your thesis. Because as things in the past, what you would do is you would probably go back to your thesis and copy that reference if you want to cite it again. But if you have a reference management or bibliographic management software, you enter it in there and you call it as and when you need it. Excuse me. Whether in your thesis or in a conference paper, in a journal article, in some other research report, you have it in your bibliographic management system. So a reference software package helps one to create a bibliography for a thesis, assignment, or journal article in a preferred citation style. That's the beauty of referencing software, is also that you can change the style and the software will organize it for you. Because if a journal you are writing in uses the in-text referencing format, whereas or a numeric referencing format, whilst the conference you are going to present your paper at requires a consecutive referencing format, the referencing software can just do this for you. So without you having to now go back and copy each one of them and give them separate numbers, it saves a lot of time. Now, referencing software packages help you to download and store references. They help you also to include abstracts, keywords, and notes with the references, and also full text, to produce a list of references for yourself or others, and to automatically insert citations of references while typing, cite while you write, create a bibliography while typing, or cite while you write. So it saves a lot of time. It makes referencing fun, and very efficient. The commonest referencing software packages are Reference Manager and EndNote or EndNote Web. Well, Reference Manager is most commonly used by people who want to share a central database of references and need to have multiple users adding and editing records at the same time. Okay. You can specify whether users are allowed to make edits to the database or not. Reference Manager offers different in-text citation templates for each reference type. Okay. And you can use the Reference Manager to create a personal database of reference information, or to insert citations and create bibliographies, or to import bibliographic data from external databases and library catalogs. Reference Manager is used most effectively from the start of a project when information is being gathered, rather than when writing up begins. But then you've read so much, a lot of things are already scattered everywhere in your office and your home and wherever else you go to. But if you have a reference management software, then all of this is in one place, in your laptop or in the cloud, somewhere. It is, however, limited to Windows. Reference Manager is limited to Windows operating system, so that's one limitation, which hopefully will be addressed shortly, if not already addressed. Then there's EndNote or EndNote Web. Here I speak about EndNote Web because EndNote Web is a derivation from EndNote. EndNote Web is a simplified version of the full desktop EndNote product. Okay. It has only recently been released and it's still under development, but it can perform many common referencing tasks. Okay. Once registered for EndNote Web, one can format citations and footnotes or a bibliography. One can use Cite While You Write in Microsoft Word to easily cite references in your paper. Download the Cite While You Write plugin for Word from the EndNote website. You can transfer references to and from EndNote on your desktop. You can share references with others who have EndNote Web. There's a lot of things that you can do. If you're in a research team, you don't each have to keep typing in the same references. You can share these references across the net. EndNote Web is compatible with recent versions of Microsoft Word, Windows, and Macintosh one must download and install a plugin to enable EndNote Web to work with Word. So these referencing software packages are very useful tools, and I would urge you to start using them right away. Indeed, the assignment that I give you, I expect to see evidence of the use of a referencing software package, and hopefully once you start using it, it will follow you the rest of your lives, and well, someday you might just say thank you for getting you off on this path. Good. So now to the assignment. The assignment for this unit would be to select a piece of work that you have done in the past, either a final year project report or a major assignment in your workplace or some mini project you have done as part of one of your postgraduate courses. Then choose a journal in which you would like to publish an article based on the work selected in one above, that is your final year project or something from your workplace, and study the guidelines for others. Following the guidelines and using a referencing software package of your choice, prepare an article drawn from your selected work for publication in the journal. Submit your draft article together with the journal's guidelines for authors to me, abeku@bruhamon.com, and copy Mr. Nakukumi, who is my teaching assistant. And this should reach us no later than 30th of April. This assignment will fetch 10 marks. Okay? So I'll expect to see it in time, and I wish you luck again in your research career. All the best. Bye-bye.